Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond. This is the Web Platform Podcast, episode number 63. Today on our panel, we have Sharon. Okay. So Sharon, she's awesome. She's from Boston. She's a JavaScript Angular JS GDE, Google Developer Expert. And she's joining us from Boston, as I said. And we have our guest today, Dan Wahlin, from the Wahlin Group. So welcome, Dan.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So tell us about yourself. What have you been doing? What are you up to?
Well, we're up to a lot lately. So I live out in the Phoenix, Arizona area. So number one, it's starting to cool down, which is a good thing. Hit our nice time of the year. Yeah, I run a company called Wahlin Consulting, and we specialize in pretty much all things web nowadays. It's probably the easiest way to do it, but obviously spend a lot of time in Angular land. So we kind of balance things between consulting, and we also do a lot of training type things as well. So keeps us busy, that's for sure. Yeah,
it's a good place to be in right now. So we brought you on because we were talking about, we were going to go through a few things, but then we kind of agreed on going through ECMAScript 2015 or ES6 and TypeScript using inside of Angular applications. That's kind of like a whole bunch of buzzwords I just threw out there. Could you kind of explain what it is?
Well, TypeScript itself is a superset of JavaScript. For those that haven't done it, I know you probably have, and Sharon. But yeah, for those that haven't done it, ES6, ES 2015, I still call it ES6, but old habits die hard. In a nutshell, yeah, it's the next version of JavaScript. It's freaking awesome. It adds a tremendous number of new features that, quite honestly, those of us been doing a lot of JavaScript over the years. I got started with JavaScript in around, it was called LiveScript back in the day, kind of show my age. And it's progressed a lot since then. Yeah, right before that. And that was back in the days of, you think IE6 is bad, man. I did IE3. That might be the worst software ever invented. But anyway. So ES6 adds a ton of new features. TypeScript itself is just a superset, which is probably my favorite feature of TypeScript. That it's not a new language. It's not some people might use CoffeeScript, but that's a totally different language. It just happens to generate JavaScript. Whereas TypeScript sits on top of the ES6 features, adds some extra features we'll probably go through, and can generate your different JavaScript files. That's my nutshell version.
And why are these important to use in our apps today, or why are they not important?
To be honest, I think it depends. I say this probably too often nowadays. It's not my quote, but you hear, right tool for the right job. And, if I'm building a small-scale app, quite honestly, we've been using ES3, ES5 definitely over the last, several years very successfully. You guys are all doing this. Everybody's been doing ES5. It works fine. And so it's kind of like, you get that nice new car, but it has like a tape cassette in it, or maybe even a, like 8-track. And then you move up to CD. Yeah, I'm really dating myself.
Yeah.
I just so everyone knows, I did not have 8 tracks. Just so everyone knows, I did have cassette tapes growing up. You had 8 tracks, nice. The good old days, right, Sharon?
Yeah, they were great. They were better than cassettes. Betamax.
Oh yeah, they seriously were. Cassettes, man, they'd always break, and then you'd try to re-spool it up, and you ever have to tape them, because they broke.
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress. So I kind of think of ES3 as like, it's a car and it works, but it had maybe the cassette tape in it, and then, ES6 moved up to CD, and then, or ES5, sorry, and then ES6, it's like you got your Bluetooth, and you got your, it's all wireless, and it works great, and that's really the difference. It's like, yeah, you can still drive that initial car, but the new car sure is a heck of a lot nicer, and gets you there in more comfort, and all this good stuff. Now with cars, that's probably not true, right? With the new cars, easier to maintain. But with ES6 and TypeScript, I think the big win is, especially on apps that are a little bit larger or enterprise scale, there's a lot of cool features it adds there. So anyway, long story short, right tool for the right job. I think it really depends on what you're building.
One of the challenges that we have with that is, not all the browsers support all of this stuff, and the transpilers, they transpile down to certain versions of the ECMAScript, right? So, I mean, if I have to support back to IE9, let's say, or even IE8, like, does TypeScript or Babel or any of these things, do they handle that? Like, can you run that stuff in there?
Well, Eric, I bet you know the answer just fine, but I'll tell for those listening.
I actually don't. I want to know.
Oh, come on. Anyway, yeah, and let's clarify. So Babel and Tracer, or I don't know. It's probably like some French, like Tracer or something, but everybody I know calls it Tracer. And they're, for those that don't know, they're ES 2015, ES6 transpilers. And so they'll convert your code basically back to ES5, like you just said. TypeScript does the same. It has 3 options right now. Really, it's 2 options, but eventually it'll be full 3. You can go back as far as ES3. You lose some features by doing that, such as some of the property stuff that's in ES5. So just about everybody goes with the ES5. They do have an ES6 output option, but it's to me, it seems to be kind of like, yeah, eventually that will output the pure, ES6 code. But, not all the browsers obviously even come close to supporting all the features. So ES5 is right now the sweet spot, I think.
And does TypeScript or Babel or any of these, do they have, or Tracer, do they have like options where you could say, well, I know that all the browsers I support have the class feature or the arrow function feature. Can I just turn those on to ES6 mode, or is it an all or nothing thing?
Well, to be honest, if they do have that, I haven't used it. I'm always transpiling to a specific, feature set. ES5, ES5 for me. Yeah, I suspect with all the polyfills out there, they probably do. I don't use that feature and don't worry about it. I don't know that I'd want that because with all the mobile devices, it's just so hit or miss, with the feature sets that are supported. So yeah, right now when it comes to like, ES6, I'm writing ES6 through TypeScript and then transpiling all of it to ES5 and using those features. Now, yeah, there's a lot of plugins though for like Babel and stuff that'll generate, like if you want to use the new async stuff, which is not even, I kind of assume just, if you read it on the internet, it must be true, right? So, there's a lot out there kind of insinuating that async, it's already in ES7. It's like, well, ES7, the spec still has a long ways to go. But just as an example, yeah, even some of the new proposed stuff that hopefully will be coming, like async, await, Babel will do that, and then decorators, there you go. And same with TypeScript. Now, TypeScript, they kind of build it into the different versions, but you've probably noticed the versioning's been pretty aggressive lately. They're doing an awesome job.
So I'm curious about something. I know with my own career as a developer, as I moved from different styles of coding, procedural to OO to functional, there has like this major brain shift that had to happen. What was the major brain shift? What was that thing you had to get over before it clicked?
Yeah, what did Ward, so you guys probably know who Ward Bell is, very good friend of mine. He just had a great comment. He called it a concept budget, I think it was, something like that, where he feels like things are moving so fast in this world that we're outside of the bounds of like there's a cap, a concept budget. And that the concept budget is too high. And I think he used a different term, but it was actually pretty funny. Yeah, so Sharon, it's a great question. So I think for those that have been doing JavaScript early on, so I mentioned, I got started, and back then it was very primitive. And so, moving through these different JavaScript features, if you've been doing it a while, I actually think it's pretty easy. The concept shift there is if you don't have that maybe object-oriented background or that at all. I did a lot of Java and C#, so that part was pretty easy. And so I think the big shift is going to be: do you want to stick with functional programming, or do you want to go with the kind of class wrapper stuff that ES 2015 has? And obviously, if you're already doing JavaScript a lot, you're probably pretty map and reduce and all that fun stuff. You're probably pretty good at the functional programming side.
Yeah.
And the good news is you don't have to use like classes. In fact, I was sitting down with Anders Heilsberg, the guy that kind of spearheaded. He wrote C# and Delphi and TypeScript. He's one of the big players there in starting it, and he's on that team. And he's, if you don't know who Anders is, he's a bigwig and in the world with programming. We were sitting down to film a video, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, and I was showing him what I was going to talk about, and it was a TypeScript feature. And it just had classes and all the class features. And he goes, "Oh, wait, we got to edit that." And when Anders says that, you kind of listen, That's like having any person that that wrote, your framework, your language, where you go, "Yeah, okay, you wrote it, you would know." And he goes, "Anyway, we got to make sure that it's clear that you don't have to use classes. For the people using functional programming, they can stick with it." And so that was a very long-winded answer, Sharon, sorry, but the answer there is it really depends on what you want to do. If you do want to go with the class mode and you haven't done it before, then yeah, I think there's going to be a little bit of a context shift there. If you've already been doing the functional programming, which you probably have if you're doing ES5, I don't think it's going to be too bad. Now, you mentioned, Erik, arrow functions. That's going to be different, destructuring. There's some new features, but I think that's just learning new syntax. Not too bad.
So which do you think is going to win? Now that we've brought classes officially back in a real way as opposed to the kind of hacky way we've been doing them, what do you think's going to win? I mean, the Java guys just going to come in and take over, or what?
The virtual DOM guys.
Yeah?
The virtual DOM guys, there you go. Well, am I allowed to consult my crystal ball real quick? I need to, hold on. Let me
go ahead.
My crystal
Place
ball
your bets.
here.
Place your bets.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. So minimum $100
free
bet
Wahlin
here,
reading.
Yeah, there you go. If you win, you can go to my blog for free. So it's not even officially out where everybody's using it yet, and we already have this massive divide. I don't know, did you guys participate in the what I call great semicolon debate of 2012, I think it was? Did you guys happen to see that?
No, but I have my opinions on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I do too, and we all know semicolons are right, and if you disagree, you're wrong. But anyway, I'm just
then you're a Swift developer.
So anyway, little things like that, even semicolons. It's like, oh my gosh, does it really? I mean, yeah, I use semicolons, and I'm going to keep using them because I use other languages that have to use them. But that's just me. And it is, again, right tool for the right job. There are some limitations, when you move to classes. You don't get some of the functional benefits. You aren't having to know prototyping per se. So when you extend another class, we all know it's prototyping under the, well, we know if you've done it. It's prototyping still under the covers, even if you use classes. But I think the risk there is if you haven't done prototyping, you jump on in, you buy into the class thing, and I'm not opposed to either, to be real honest. I like classes, but I'm totally cool with the functional way, because we've all been doing that. But I do think there's a danger with maybe those that didn't jump into JavaScript. Like, I work with a lot of server-side people. That's all they do. They've never touched the DOM. They've never written much JavaScript other than, their idea of writing JavaScript is you go find a snippet out on the web and you copy and paste it, and now I wrote JavaScript, right? So I think that to answer the question, I think it really is going to depend on where people are coming in from. I think people like yourselves who already super skilled at, the functional approach, you know what goes on with prototyping. You know how that kind of hops between the prototypes and works. People coming in from maybe Java or C# or maybe they've been in server probably are going to go with the class, and I do think it's going to be a huge draw for them. I've already, as you probably have, Sharon, talked with a lot of people who are like, oh man, I could do that. What I worry about is, how if you don't understand what's going on behind the scenes, right. If you don't know what's going on behind the scenes now,
it's not classical inheritance, it's prototypal inheritance.
Yeah.
There you go.
And it's just different enough to bite you.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I don't know what's going to win. To be honest, I think given the number of object-oriented developers out there, I do think there's going to be a huge percentage of people that will go with the class approach because it just feels good, get that warm, fuzzy feeling. So, yeah.
There are developers, too, like Eric Elliott, who's constantly tweeting about how the classes are really bad, right?
I have read his post, yes.
Yeah, and he has some really good points, and like Danny Blue, one of the developers that is also a host on here as well. He did some performance testing on that as well, and it is faster to do the functional programming, but he found that when you're doing really massive amounts of classes, like lots of them, it actually got a little bit faster than the functional approach. Like at some point, it hits some curve.
Kind of a threshold, huh? Interesting.
But would your application need to do that much? You know what I mean? Like.
Yeah, and going on that point, so I mentioned earlier this right tool for the right job. If I'm not using classes, then I'm using a JavaScript pattern, and so one of my favorite patterns is the revealing prototype pattern, because you get all those benefits of the shared functions on the prototype and all that. So I think one of the big things too is the size of the app, and kind of which your comment, Eric, made me think of this. We do a lot of work with some big companies out there, Intel as an example, and they have some really big apps. I was in Kansas City. This has actually been probably it's actually been a year ago now. Geez, time flies. And the company had an app, and this isn't even that big these days. You guys will go, oh, I have one bigger, but it was 100,000 lines of JavaScript.
That's still pretty big.
It's pretty big.
It's huge. It's huge. Yeah, but I mean, I even know of bigger. Where we're talking millions of lines, but those are for the big companies. But anyway, that's where now I think it's going to come down to your team. John Pop, as an example, has an awesome style guide, right, for Angular. Todd Motto has one, and there's a few out there. I think that's where your team is going to have to sit down if you're on a bigger team building these big apps and make that decision and say, hey, do we want to make it so that if we're bringing in contractors or we have new hires or whatever, that's super easy to pick up? I think that's the classes. Or do we want to make it where it's the kind of more raw metal approach, which to me is the functional, programming? And I don't know the answer to that. I think that depends on your team and where your skill sets lie.
Yeah. Yeah, we adopted John Papa's style guide at work. One of our developers actually created a generator for it.
Cool.
Which he has, which is open source. So if you go to his, maybe I'll put that in the show notes. If you go to his stuff, you can see. But
cool.
But yeah, it's really important to have that sort of structure. We're looking at doing like Babel for ours because for our setup in there. So we're trying it out on a couple of different applications. There's not a lot of style guides on that yet. I see a lot of really great content the past month, actually, especially from the GDEs of the AngularJS coming out. And Pascal Precht his blog has amazing stuff on Angular 2.
Pascal's he's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like he was supposed to be on today, but he's sick, so he can't attend. But yeah, I mean, I was really shocked because there was nothing for a while, and then the past like month or two, I see like so much stuff flying everywhere, like for Angular 2.
Yeah.
Should people wait for Angular 2 to incorporate this stuff, or should we do it right now?
All right, so here's this is you talk to probably 100 developers, and you'll probably get at least 50 opinions on this, right? But a few of us will agree. What I'm recommending, because we do a lot of architecture, and we'll go in and help people. In addition to the training, then they'll be like, well, now we got to start the app. So how do we start? And so if I'm starting either a greenfield, Angular project, maybe I'm even doing a migration of I did Angular, but I'm seeing a lot of people lately, they did it, and I actually just finished, I just flew in last night from Arizona, and we did a Angular class, a 4-day kind of end-to-end class, and one of the comments was, oh, that's why I was doing that. We were covering some custom directives and things, and the guy, he laughed, and his name was Matt, and I go, oh, what's up, Matt? And he goes, honestly, I had no idea why I was doing that. It just worked, and so I went with it. And so I think the other aspect is you have the greenfield, and then you have those that they did an Angular project, but you don't know what you don't know when you first start, and I'm the same, and I think we're all the same that way. And so my recommendation is I'm starting with, now I'm a huge TypeScript fan. Before it got all this fame from the Angular world, I kind of bought on early and nobody seemed to care. And then all of a sudden it got a little more popular. I was like, well, cool, I already do that. So we are pretty much any project we did a project, for instance, for Microsoft. When was it? 6 months ago about now. And we did TypeScript. And it was an Angular 1, project. And so I think it makes absolute sense to jump in. I don't care if it's ES6 and Babel, like you mentioned, Erik. I think that's cool. Or, the TypeScript with its own transpiler. I don't see a lot of reason to hang out in the older ES5. I mean, when did ES5 come out? Do you guys know? I'm trying to remember.
2009, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say 7, but it might be 9. I don't remember, but it's in that frame, I think. I mean, it's like, geez, it's 6 years at least, old. And so I'll give you a real-life story of why I think this approach is cool of jumping in like you're saying you guys are doing, Erik. So at Intel, and I've given this story a lot, so the guy there probably sick of me telling it, but anyway, his name's Jay. Jay manages a group at Intel, and over 2 years ago, they decided to go with TypeScript with Angular 1X. Yeah, it was probably like 1.2 back then, but anyway. So for 2 years, they've been doing this very successfully, as I talk to them every now and then. And now, in 2015, they now have code that's more modern than most of the code people are writing, right now. It's kind of crazy.
Wow.
So my take on it, so now I'm like, man, you're like a prophetic or something. You had an awesome crystal ball. So my take on it is if I'm starting a new project, yeah, we do recommend either TypeScript or ES6. Now, you do have to know, like you said, Sharon, you sort of got to, you don't want to get down into the bottom and go, crap, we weren't going up. We dug ourselves a hole because we didn't know about this feature or something. So, obviously you need to know what you're doing with it. But, sorry, I keep moving the camera around. The laptop's kind of heating up. It's on my lap here. But anyway, long story short, we're starting all new projects with TypeScript. But if you said, we're doing ES5, I'd be like, hey, again, right tool for the right job. But that's what we're doing.
Yeah, TypeScript, I don't think we have an opposition to it at my workplace. It's just that most of the people are not familiar with it, and they're not in the Microsoft stack. So we're typically all front-end developers using open source mostly. So.
Well, that's the cool thing with TypeScript, though, and Anders, going back to the story with him. So we had this set we were on, and I got to spend about 5 minutes just going through the content. And I mentioned like classes. He's, oh no, we got to show you can do functional still. And his number one point he wanted to emphasize to me that pretty much so I didn't screw it up, I think, this interview, was we are everyone. He says, yes, I work for Microsoft, but it doesn't matter. We are as open as we can possibly be, and we want to be even more open. And I was like, wow. I mean, this is coming from, he's like the equivalent of CEO, but on the technical side at Microsoft. So, I mean, he's very, very, very high up in the company.
Have you met the Edge team? Like, they're all
I have not. Yeah.
Yeah. Jacob Rossi, Travis Lighthead, you should definitely talk with them because they're very open. You know, they're not
Yeah,
open source, but they
cool.
have a user voice where you can go and say, hey, you know, vote up this particular feature in the web platform, and they take that into account. I mean, they're implementing shadow DOM and templates from web components now, so it's like
Cool.
pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. So anyway, yeah, whether it's ES6 or TypeScript, I'm fine either way. I do like on larger apps, types are cool. I mean, but TypeScript really only has a set of pretty minimal built-in types, right? And I don't want to go too off tangent, but I'll finish this up hopefully really quick. Then you're gonna be like, don't ask any more questions. He talks too much. But anyway, you know, you have like your number and your Boolean and your string and your array, and that's pretty much it. And okay, that's cool and all, and it is nice to know that if Sharon, you know, you wrote a function that takes a string and a number, that yeah, I get some code help as I type, and it catches it if I screw up, and that's nice. But I'll tell you, the killer feature is the interfaces, and that's where I'm passing like a settings object. You know, take a jQuery plugin. You know, you always had to go read the docs to figure out what the properties were to pass, and if you screw that up, you know, it doesn't work. One of my favorite features of TypeScript is interfaces. And so I won't go into the details there, but in a nutshell, you can define a code contract, hook that up to like an object that's passed to a method, and now if I screw it up, it's easy to catch, where that's really hard to catch in even ES6. So anyway, that's some of the cool things.
Is that, I mean, I was going to ask where you stood on typing, whether you're more for strongly typed code or less. I'm guessing that you're leaning towards more strongly typed code because that's the logical way to lean. But I was also going to ask about, what do you consider to be the killer feature, the one thing that would really convince somebody to go do this now, like that just saves you so much time, or just makes you smile, or you just sit there and go, that's just freaking cool?
That's an awesome question.
That is a great question. Crap, now you're making me think, Sharon. Come on.
I know.
Well, I think so this isn't necessarily a killer feature, but I do think it's cool. So given that I do a lot of TypeScript, I can take your code and Erik, your code, and literally copy and paste it into a TypeScript file, and it just works. So I don't have to, like, if I want to move to TypeScript, for instance, I don't even have to add types. As you mentioned, it's optional. Mm-hmm. I don't have to move to classes. I can keep functional. And, you know, Anders was, now I've made that point, hopefully. And so I guess, number one, I like the fact that it's built on top. It's a superset. It's not another language. And a lot of people think, and I've heard this a million times, and I'm like, it's not right, you know, that TypeScript is like this whole other language. And in fact, I had somebody, this class we ran, ask, so is classes a TypeScript feature, or where did that come from? I said, no, they're getting all this from the ES6 spec, and ES7 in some cases, which doesn't really have a spec yet, but it's being worked on eventually. So I think my number one cool feature, which isn't even a feature of the language, but it's just a feature of the overall process, is that I can take existing code, plug it into a TS file, run it through the TypeScript compiler, and if it's just ES5, it's just going to output it. It just passes it through as ES5. So obviously there's no benefit there. The probably secondary coolest feature, I will say, and I mentioned I'm on the fence on, I can go either way on functional or class. So I'm totally cool with either way. But I will say we've done a lot of work with American Express lately. They have a ton of Java developers at American Express. And so the class thing we've been talking about, that alone is like just a super attractive feature to that group, because, you know, they're living in the Java world and they don't write JavaScript, and JavaScript, quite honestly, scares some of them, which is funny, right? Because they're writing this hardcore Java on the back end. Mm-hmm. But to them, JavaScript's the more scary aspect, because, you know, then you have the DOM and CSS and all this other crap we got to learn.
And people see it.
Yeah, and people see, and I get that question all the time. So wait a sec. So how do I hide my code? You know, how do I compile it into? I'm like, you don't. You can obfuscate it, but Yeah, aside from that, interfaces are one of my favorite features. Interfaces are just on an enterprise app that has thousands of lines of code. Interfaces really are a killer feature. And I'm not one of those letter of the law guys where if you didn't type, like if I look at your code, Sharon, and you're not typing every single thing, I'm okay with that. Yeah, I say use it as you need. I'll give you an example, though, where it's cool. Promises or observables in Angular 2, but we'll stick with promises because most people know those. Very easy to use, and they're pretty common, obviously, nowadays. But what are you getting back, right? So, when you do response.data, as an example, if you're doing a then in Angular, what's data? And for most of us, it comes down to, well, I whip up, I use Postman a lot for Chrome to check out my AJAX requests and things. I'm whipping that up, or hopefully there's some documentation, hopefully, because we as developers, we're awesome at documentation.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Super.
That's right up there. If I pick my 3 things I want to do for my perfect job, it's regular expressions.
Right up there at the top.
Documentation. Yeah, you get the idea. But anyway, to solve that problem, TypeScript, you can write an interface for that particular promise once it gets resolved, so that if you're in an editor that supports it, I'm a big fan of WebStorm, Sublime Text. I love the new Visual Studio Code, actually. It's pretty awesome, actually, surprisingly. Most people that don't like Microsoft are like, that thing sucks. It's actually pretty freaking cool. In fact, I found out the guy that, his name's Erik as well. I can't remember his last name. He was the guy that did Eclipse, a lot of it, I guess. So I was like, dang, that's cool. But anyway, interfaces are a huge deal. What else is a feature I love? Those are some of my big ones. So I think just the fact that it sits on top and kind of augments ES6 is probably my favorite feature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it, actually. I was very surprised because I had a horrible experience with CoffeeScript where
You too?
I didn't like it. Like, I liked it initially. Like, initially I was like, oh, this is cool, some new syntax or whatever, but it compiled down to ES3. You didn't have an option really at the time to change that. I didn't really like the feel of it. It didn't feel good, and I didn't see the advantage because I liked JavaScript. I knew JavaScript. If you're in a team that's like doing Rails development, it's very similar in some of those things. So maybe that works well. But in TypeScript, I did like the interfaces. I did use that, and not in Angular 2, obviously. But I had Angular 1 app that we had, and I sort of fought the TypeScript thing because I was like,
hey, most people do.
CoffeeScript again.
Yeah,
but it's not, because you can optionally do a lot of this stuff. What I really liked was that you have this inline errors, and you had a lot of debugging capabilities that came along with it if you had an editor that supported it, like you said. So we use WebStorm. I just started playing with Atom because I've been having some bloating issues in WebStorm where it's crashing on me. So overall it's a great editor, but I'm trying new things. That's with every editor. Once you get to a certain point, you're using a lot of features.
Yeah, pretty much.
So I'm trying some new things, and the type files I thought was going to be a real difficult thing, but as long as they exist, it's not, and you can create your own pretty easily from what I saw.
Yeah.
So that's nice. You get that checking of your code automatically. The debugging tools, I'd really like to hear kind of what you're using for debugging in TypeScript, because
sure.
Like especially debugging in production, because you have this source code and then it's compiled down.
Yeah, and that might be the number one question I'll eventually. So once people learn TypeScript, so a couple weeks ago we were doing some Node stuff with American Express. They're kind of getting into the Node world as well, which is interesting because, like I said, most of the groups are Java. But anyway, as we were talking, I love Node. But anyway, that was the question that came up because I showed a little TypeScript demo on how, hey, you can even use TypeScript for Node, code. And then they said, okay, well that's cool, and I could see how we can debug that, because that's in their case, server-side, code. So there's pretty easy to debug server-side stuff. And then that question came up, well, what if I'm using it on the client side for like Angular 1X or 2 when it eventually comes out? And, of course, my answer was, no, you can't do it. No, I'm just kidding. It's pretty awesome, actually. TypeScript uses map files, and so it's optional, but I don't know why you would turn it off in dev mode. But there's a little compiler switch that you can say, yes, output the map files, kind of like with Babel, which it's funny. Have you guys heard of the pronunciations? I'm going to totally digress here of Babel.
Yeah.
So somebody told me, because is he from Australia? Do you know the guy that does Babel? I heard he was. Does anyone know?
I don't know. It was 6 to 5 before, so there was a bunch of people.
Yeah. Somebody told me it's actually Babel, and I went, okay, now you're screwing with my mind, man.
I haven't
Babel,
heard that one.
Babel, Babel. I'm like, seriously. But anyway,
Sounds like a cheese.
I'm gonna make one called provolone. But no, anyway, getting back to the debugging. So not a problem at all. It's awesome. You get your map files, and when you're in dev mode, you can set breakpoints right in the TypeScript files. If you want to jump into the output it generates, which is surprisingly close to what you would write. They do add, they have to add for like the extends and stuff when they generate the ES5. They have to add their little functions that prototype, and you'll see that at the top. But it's awesome story for debugging, yeah. And I'd say the same goes for ES6 though, right? So it's pretty good.
Yeah. Awesome. So how has it changed? Like, because we were using, I think, 1.3 when we started the project, and we ended up using 1.4 by the end. And now 1.5 is like pretty much ES6 with that superset on top, because the syntax was different before, from what I remember.
Yeah, so they've always based they have their own, when it comes to the typing part, since ES6 doesn't support that, then yeah, there are some little different syntax you can do there because it gets compiled out, right? That's the one thing people that are maybe new to TypeScript don't realize is that, like the interfaces we were talking about, the number, the Boolean, whatever the types are you're using, they, never make it into the JavaScript, of course. It's just a dev time, or I guess you could say compile time, but it's more of a transpilation time activity. And so, you have an interface you write that says this settings object has to have these properties, but of course that never makes it, into the final build. So yeah, there is a little bit of different syntax there you might come across. But the core syntax is actually it's based on the, ES6. Now what's new, there's actually a ton of new. I don't even know if I remember everything that's new because there's been so much lately, but the biggest new feature is support for ES6 modules. So now, there's, what are there, 3 or 4. When you go to transpile, you can set CommonJS for Node, obviously, AMD for like required JS, and then they have a new one called System, and it's just kind of for like System.js or one of the ES6 module loaders, So that's probably the biggest feature that recently came out, and I'm pretty sure 1.5 is the one that came out in. They also made a change, which was an interesting change. So they used to actually call in a file before ES6 modules. You used to be able to put your own little, in Java they'd call it a package. In something like .NET they'd call it a namespace. But it's a naming container. And they used to call it actually module. But now they actually called it namespace. So a little bit of a syntax tweak there. That's 1.5 as well, I believe.
For system, though,
it
does require a runtime, right, if you choose that system one?
Yeah, you still have to use System.js or one of the other options out there. I got 30% battery here, so we're not too bad then. I love when the battery thing pops up, It's like, oh, what do I got? Yeah, you are going to have to use a loader. TypeScript doesn't do that. All it does is it outputs the system.register, I think it is, syntax, so that something like system.js or one of the other loaders can load those modules. Yeah, so you'll still have to use one of those.
So It sounds like the greatest thing since sliced bread. What did they
Oh
get?
yeah.
What did they get wrong? What would you have done different if it was, your TypeScript?
Ooh, wow, that's a good
You
question.
got the
You gotta keep
tough
in mind.
ones today, Sharon.
She does. She's, I heard she was genius, and now I see that. Yeah, I don't want to talk with Sharon anymore. She's too hard. She's hardcore.
Or
Well,
even minor annoyances if you really can't think of anything,
yeah.
because there's a lot
I
of
mean,
smart people that thought about this a long time. So
I was going to say you got to keep in mind this is Anders Heilsberg. I mean, he's been in this business for a long time. Annoyances.
it's all right. If you don't answer it here, I'm
Yeah,
sure it'll be the subject of a blog post when it all comes
I'm
to
sure.
as we go off the air.
What'll happen is I'll close my laptop and be like, wait, I thought of one.
You can't think of anything even
really am
remotely
not.
negative to say. This is
I
not,
honestly am.
dirt. Come on.
No, the reason I'm having a hard time there is if you don't like something, you just don't use that feature.
Yeah.
So like if you don't like how the type support works, which is, I don't know why you wouldn't like it for bigger apps, but some people don't. They're like anti-types. I really don't have a negative there. Now, I guess the negative, okay, I can think of one, is you are relying on them. So I do have one I thought of. It took me a while, but I'm back.
Mm-hmm.
You are relying on them. So right now it doesn't support 100% of the ES6 features.
Okay.
So let's say that like ES7, let's just pretend that tomorrow async await comes out. Now, I don't know that this is actually a negative anyway, because it's not like browsers tomorrow are just going to go, oh, cool, we now support async await, right? It's not going to happen. It's going to be a while. But you would have to wait for either the open source contribution, somebody would have to do a pull request for that feature, or for the team to release that particular build in the compiler before you could use it. So I suppose that is a negative, that you are relying on not just the team, because they take tons of open source pull requests. But at the same time, I mean, I think you can make that same argument for Babel and Tracer and all the others, but that is kind of a negative, is you're sitting on top of something that, it's like, I want to move to this new feature right now. I'm not waiting.
Right.
It's like the kid that wants to open their present before Christmas or something. I'm not waiting. I got to do it now. Yeah, I mean, there is something to be said there, but at the same time, I don't know that that's that big of a negative, so I was kind of stretching there. But sorry, I'm trying, Sharon.
All right.
Babel has. Sorry, I was saying Babel has a lot of them actually. If you look at what is it, Kangak's his ES6 checker and ES7, Babel has quite a lot of those.
Oh yeah.
So
tons of plugins.
I think TypeScript has close to that too.
Yeah.
I don't see it on there, but I'm pretty sure it does. So we talked about debugging a little bit. One of the things that I was curious about is if you have like a boilerplate or a generator that you use for a lot of these type of apps, because it's a lot of setup to get some of these things if you're not used to it. So do you have something you use?
When we start a new project, sometimes the companies will use some of the Yeoman generators, or want us to, and so sometimes we'll use Yeoman, a generator. I don't have a particular one there that's a favorite. As you know, there's like 203,000 different Yeoman generators out there. So no, I don't have a favorite, but yeah, sometimes they'll want us to start with that, just so that when their team builds other projects, it looks the same. I really don't. What I have, I do a lot of these, Angular in 20-minute things or Angular in 60-minute things. I've done over the years. So I have some nice little projects up on GitHub that provide. I'm a big fan of Gulp, for instance, and so I'll have the Gulp file, my package JSON, kind of all that stuff already configured, where I can just clone that and start from there. So that's one option. But no, I'm not a huge fan of. They absolutely add value, so don't get me wrong here. But I'm not a huge fan of some of the generators per se. I don't know. I have my own unique style, I guess, and I'm comfortable starting my way. But sometimes
roll your own.
Yeah. But sometimes when you work with clients, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes those times I will have to build something, or we will. But yeah, let me see here. Where am I at? Okay, hold on. While we're going here, I see a power outlet. So chug away with questions if you have more, and I'm going to try to plug in here.
I have
Except for
something to add
Sharon.
on that one.
Sharon, you're banned from questions. Yours are too hard.
Sorry.
So, I'm just kidding. No,
Think of a really good one while I ask this, Sharon.
So hold on here. While you guys are asking, I'm going to move around. Sorry. Go ahead, Erik. I'll listen while you're doing.
I thought Anders was holding your laptop up. Nothing wrong with TypeScript here.
Yeah, I'm. For those that, Erik. Yeah. Was that okay, Anders?
What do we call those? Nerd crushes?
Yeah, he is
little bit of a nerd crush.
Yeah, he is. He's a cool guy. I'll have to admit. He's for what he's done in life. He's not cocky at all. He's he's older than me even, but he's a cool guy. I'll have to admit I like him. Okay, I think I got power, so we won't die here. So go ahead.
So on the note of doing boilerplates and generators, it sounds like you don't have one that's like your own Like we took the style guide, like I said, from John Papa, and Danny turned it into this generator, which a few people have contributed to, and
Nice.
we're sort of adding what we need to do on there for our needs. It's not for everybody, like you said. So I definitely recommend something like that. But one of the things I've been wanting to do is, in the past, I've worked with Vagrant and VMs, and what's great about that is that you just give somebody some configuration and they can just, if they have VirtualBox and Vagrant installed, and Ruby, because Vagrant runs on Ruby, they can just get up and running really fast. They don't have to know how to install Node and have all those problems that you have with the infrastructure and DevOps. It's all taken care of for you. Problem is, it's a good amount of maintenance, but the biggest problem is that the size of the VMs is huge, the load time is really fast, and I heard you recently on .NET Rocks podcast talking about Docker. So have you come up with some portable solutions that you could use for multiple applications, like where you have a Node.js and Mongo, type of Docker containers that you can just duplicate and make it unique in some way?
I do. So right now our company website's pretty old, so I'm not even going to give the URL out because I should have updated it years ago, and just we've been so busy that we haven't really needed it, which is a good problem, I guess. But so we have a new one that's going to be coming out. Eventually, my wife came up. Nobody can. In fact, Erik, you might be the first ever podcast person that I haven't met that said my last name right. So good job on that. Everyone says Wahlin or Wahlin. Now I'm just like,
I've heard you on a few podcasts before, and they're like, did we get that wrong? And you're like, yes. So I remember.
Now I'm just like, whatever, it's good enough. But anyway, so my wife came up with, it's going to be codewithdan.com. And it's because it's so easy that, even a caveman can remember that one. So it'll be coming out eventually. It's going to be all Docker-based. So it's a Node.js site with MongoDB, and see, what do we have? We have 3 Node containers. Nginx will be the front end. That's another container. And Redis will be another one, and then MongoDB will be another one. And so it's not actually that big of a setup. It's just going to run on one VM. I'm not expecting Amazon.com traffic at all. It's more just to let people know about the classes or the consulting stuff we do. But long story short, yeah, so over the last 2 to heard about it 3 months, hey, you hear about something and think it's cool, but until you dive in, you don't really know. So over the last 2 months, though, or so, I've been really diving in, lots and lots of time. And Docker, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's a really cool idea. In essence, their logo is a whale with shipping containers on top of the whale. And the idea there is that you have a VM, like you said. But the problem with VMs, I listened to, there was a lady, she's from some company in London. She was a great speaker. She was on YouTube talking about Docker. And they did some analysis, I guess. I mentioned this on the .NET Rocks one. The average VM, they said, it took between 3 to 4 minutes for it to be fully functional. And, that's actually a fairly long amount of time, not for development, but for production things. You know, if you have to reboot a VM or whatever. The average Docker container, and this depends, this I can tell you for sure depends, but is 3 to 4 seconds. And so it's just boom, boom, boom. So I can now, instead of, here's the problem we all have, is let's say that we're all on the same team. And you mentioned you do a lot of front-end stuff, Erik. And Sharon, are you all front-end, Sharon, nowadays? Or do
currently I'm all front-end, but I've done full-stack JavaScript. Okay,
so you've done it all. So let's say, Sharon, you're doing some of the Node stuff, you know? So we have maybe MongoDB, and Erik now is doing some of the Angular stuff for that, and then I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know, doing something.
Leading the charge.
Leading the charge, yes. So anyway, the problem we have nowadays is to get that type of a development environment on just somebody's laptop. I mean, a lot of my folks, they can work anywhere in the world. So we'll work with contractors and things. And so it is a real problem because it's like it takes a day or more just to get set up right, you know, and then you're on Skype or Hangouts or whatever trying to, you know, well, this isn't working. Well, let's do a desktop screen share and let me see if I can figure it out. With Docker, they would install what's called the Docker tools. Docker tools have several main components, but it has Docker itself, which is kind of, think of it as it's the client. VirtualBox is what they use, although you can do different things, but VirtualBox is kind of the default VM, because you do on like Mac, to run Docker containers, they sit on top of Linux, the Linux core. So you can't run Docker just natively on your Mac. Now Windows is also coming out, Windows Server 2016. They're now going to support containers as well, but from what I understand, you're still going to have 2016, so you'll probably have to run a VM, you know, as well. So anyway, long story short, it runs on Linux, or soon it's going to run on Windows Server. So literally in a matter of, well, I don't know, 5 minutes, let's say, 10 minutes max, I can install the Docker tools, which is going to get VirtualBox configured, the Docker client, something called Docker machine, then you have Docker Compose. And these are just tools. You don't have to use them all, but we're using all of them. They're pretty cool once you know them. Now what I can do is I can literally have you guys run a very simple command that in as fast as you can download, because you do have to download, like I'll give you an example. My Node images, my Node Docker images, they call them, are 600 to 800 meg, right? Which is better than 3 gig or whatever a VM is, you know, but they're about 6 to 800 meg. And so you do have to download the image, but once you download it, it's there, and you're kind of ready to go. And so long story short, we could now, if I had some Docker images up in the Docker Hub, it's called, you guys could install the Docker tools, and literally in as fast as you could download the images, we would have the entire environment set up, and ours, you know, Sharon, yours, Erik, me, we would be 100% identical. So now when we go to production, we can just move these, well, images in, get our source code, and there's ways you can deal with this, but you get these containers into whether it's, you know, AWS or Azure or App Harbor, what is it, App Harbor or whatever it is, anyway. And we know it's going to work because what you're running locally is exactly what you're going to push to production. And you guys know the fun there, right? Works on my machine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would
and
imagine.
That's the exciting thing. So anyway.
I would imagine too, though, with that, like because of that quick, you know, recovery time, you could handle like some crazy DDoS attack, right? And then be up and running within a minute.
The cool thing is, and I haven't played with this part, but yeah, I do a lot of, if you guys are interested, I have a lot of, on my blog, I have a lot of Flipboard magazines. You guys ever use Flipboard at all?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So I have, you know, an AngularJS Flipboard, and I started a new one called Docker, for Docker Flipboard magazine. So if anyone's interested, you can go to my blog and get them. They're all free, you know. Anyway, a lot of the articles I put in, I read a lot. I think the whole key to our success in our world is, you know, I read at least 30 minutes to an hour a day of articles. It's, you know how it is. It's hard to keep up. But anyway, there's been a lot of great articles lately about that exact thing. Not so much a DDS type attack, but the concept of scaling out quickly. Because there's another tool which I'm not going to be using, but it's called Docker Swarm, which is a really cool name. And Docker Swarm is a clustering technology.
Wow.
And I'll be honest, I've always been one of those guys that I have zero interest in the like IT ops side. It's like, that bores me. I could care less how you set up your servers and whatever. I don't know, I don't get into that very much. It's not programming to me. But I saw this Docker stuff and started going, man, this actually looks really cool. So that's why I've been digging into that world. And yeah, our new site that'll be coming out is going to be 100% Docker container based. So it's pretty neat.
I just had a quick question about your tooling beyond Docker, to bring it back a little bit to the TypeScript stuff too. You mentioned a couple of the IDEs. What does your everyday tooling look like right now?
Thank you, Sharon, for that easy lob softball question.
I figured you deserved at least one.
Now I'm like, man, I got to think of something bad about TypeScript before we get off, because they're going to be like, they're paying him. He's bribed.
Yeah, never trust any developer who doesn't have something bad to say.
That's right. And I'm sure I do. It's just, it's too early in the morning here. So anyway, you guys are 3 hours ahead. So you've already had your coffee and stuff. I haven't eaten yet. That's the problem. Anyway. So my normal setup for tools, so I mentioned for the JavaScript tasks is Gulp. I'm a big Gulp fan still. Editor, I kind of toggle right now, actually. I have some projects that I already have going, so I don't want to mess with them, that are in WebStorm. But then I was using Sublime a lot, just because it has some pretty awesome plugins. But my big thing is any editor I pick has to debug Node. If I don't have a good Node debugger, sorry, I'm not using your editor, because I can use Node Inspector and there's all these other options, but let's face it, setting a breakpoint right in the editor, is just awesome.
Right.
So long story short, Visual Studio Code and WebStorm on my Mac are the two biggies. And mainly because they're awesome editors, but also because they have awesome debugging support. We do also, so we kind of range from Node.js projects to sometimes we do Web API, which is C# based. And for that, I'm using I have Parallels running, and I'm in full Visual Studio for that because it's C# and all that. Yeah. Now that'll change because next version is going to run on Mac. So probably I won't need Parallels a whole lot at that point, because I run an iMac in my office and I run a Mac here, and I'm pretty much all Mac nowadays. So that's my main ones. I'm trying to think. So for Mongo, I like RoboMongo, it's called. Okay. Yeah. It's just a nice visual tool because I'm not a huge fan of doing queries through the command line. For what else do I use? Pretty much all command line other than that tools. Okay.
We're running a little short on time, but I did want to just quickly ask if when you're doing like RWD or any type of responsive strategy, does using TypeScript and or ES6 for that matter, does that change your mobile strategy?
Not really. I think that all comes down to, are you doing true, responsive design, meaning we're going to have one website that's responsive, and that'd be what a lot of people do nowadays, is just kind of hack in the mediators, right? So in that case, no, I'd say it doesn't really change mine much. Would it change it if I'm doing true mobile first design? That's a good question, actually. Man, Sharon, you should let her ask that one. That's a tougher one. I think, so here's my take on everything. I'm never a fan of one size fits all. I just don't ever, I've been in this business a long time now, and been on enough projects over my career, good and bad, that I realized finally that, the light bulb moment of there's just not going to be a one-size-fits-all. You know how it is with us developers. We get all opinionated and, no, you should do it this way. Oh, I'm doing it this way. Oh, well, that's wrong. Yeah, whatever. That's just your way. I personally think it all comes down to the initial architecture. Could I absolutely use ES6 or TypeScript? Absolutely. Because it's going to compile down to ES5, and you would have had to write ES5 anyway. What I think matters, especially on mobile, is are you leveraging, for instance, prototyping appropriately for memory purposes? I mean, I know, I'm gonna get the 6S Plus when I can get it, but I can't get it. So right now I'm on the Note 3 right now, and I have, I don't know, what do I have? 1 or 2 gig of RAM, on the freaking phone, which is crazy. And what's the 6S have? I think I saw 3 gig of RAM or something like that. Anyone know? You guys know? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. It's pretty significant, I think. That might be wrong. But to me, it always comes down to, let's not jump in. Let's think this through. And if my goal in life is to build a mobile, and when I say mobile, I mean web mobile, through the browser app, yeah, I'm going to be thinking through what's the worst case mobile app or mobile device that might be hitting, and the answer there is we don't know. So I'm probably going to have to scale back a tad, and I'm not a big fan of let's design for lowest common denominator, because then you almost penalize the people that have the modern stuff. But at the same time, I think there's a little bit of a middle ground there. So that's, I think, where it comes back to, if you're going to be using ES6 and classes and things, you better understand how the prototyping is working under the covers. And that's where I might start to debate, am I going to go functional or class or what? So, yeah, so anyway, right tool for the right job again. I say that too much now. Like every interview I do, it's like, I need to stop saying that. But it's true,
Yeah, it depends, right?
And that's the answer. It depends. We're in the consulting world. I don't work for a company where I go in every day and work on their products. Well, not week, but every month or 2 or 3, it's a totally different project. So that's why I say it depends, because it's just very, very different in our world.
Yeah, definitely is. If our listeners would like to, find you, follow you on Twitter, help with the projects that you're doing that are open source, learn more about TypeScript or ES6, Angular, where can they find you?
Yeah, so Twitter, it's probably won't be able to spell my name, but I'll spell it's at Dan Wahlin, Wahlin. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes anyway. So at Dan Wahlin. The blog right now, it's going to move to blog.codewithdan.com soon. Yeah, in fact, that's already up, but I'm not actively using it yet because the site's not up. So right now it's weblogs.asp.net/dwahlin is my blog. So on TypeScript. So this thing Anders and I did, it was a TypeScript kind of core class. That's a video class that's free. Harvard has a program called edX. I don't know if you guys have heard about it, but it's pretty popular now. Oh, you're in Boston, Sharon, so you're right there. Close. And so anyway, we did this TypeScript thing. Anders couldn't stick around for the whole thing, but it's in we were in the studio and filmed it all up nice, and there's labs you go through. So if you want a free option, just search for TypeScript edX, EDX, and it's hosted on this Harvard engine, I guess. It's kind of a longer 6-month thing, and there's more of a commitment to that one because once you sign up, you're actually kind of like committing to participate in the forums and do the labs and all this. So that's an option. John Papa and I did a TypeScript course up on pluralsight.com. And if you just want reading material, check out my blog. I have a lot of TypeScript posts on my blog. Or I would recommend following the TypeScript team. Jonathan Turner and team, they do a lot of great blog posts about like the new features and things.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Dan. Thank you, Sharon, for coming too.
You're welcome.
And
thank you guys. Yeah, it was great to be on. And Sharon, thanks for the thoughtful questions. That now, as soon as I come off my laptop, as soon as I eat and Twitter's going to blow. You're awesome. I got to meet you in person now. So shake Sharon's hand, be like, oh, that was awesome. But yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care. Enjoy.
You want to learn more about what's coming on next on the Web Platform Podcast? Follow us on Twitter at the Web Platform, or on Google Plus and YouTube at Plus the Web Platform. We also need your help in creating transcripts of the episodes and helping to create open source projects under our GitHub organization. Contact Erik Isaksen at Isaksen
or Danny Blue at D_Blue. That's DEE_BLOO.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you all next week.